Welcome to this webinar on the temporary emergency measure to preserve bridging employment. For those of you who are new to our webinars, perhaps a short introduction. We have last week we held a first webinar on the Corona crisis and employment law. At that point in time, it was known to us that the Dutch government would implement a emergency measure where wages would be compensated in case of a decline in turnover. At that point in time, the measure was not fleshed out yet. It has been published last Tuesday. This is it. It's a 44-page document that includes lots of details on this measure. And in this webinar, we will go through the details to see if this would be helpful for your company. I'm here with my colleague Mick Höcker. He is at a safe 1.5 meter distance from me, and we will both do a part of the webinar. A couple of things up front. For those of you who are new to Zoom, you have the possibility to chat. I've put something in the chat. Welcome everybody. We will start at 9 a.m. sharp. If you have questions on certain topics, please feel free to put those questions in the chat, and we will look at the questions when the topic arises. We also have a Q&A, but that does not seem to function, so I would kindly ask you to use the chat and not the Q&A. We will record the webinar and we will send you the recording afterwards. Also, if we finalize the webinar, a survey will pop up. We will kindly request you to fill in the survey so that we can improve our webinars going forward. This is one of the first, but it will certainly not be the last. Okay. Looking at the program, the Q&A, the chat, we've dealt with that. I will in a moment first talk about the now in general, and you might wonder what is now. Well, in Dutch, the temporary emergency measure to preserve bridging employment is called de tijdelijke noodmaatregel Overbrugging voor behoud van werkgelegenheid. And the short abbreviation is NOW. Noodmaatregel overbrugging werkgelegenheid. And I think for ease of communication, we should use now. And if you talk with your Dutch counterparts, I think they will know what you're talking about when you use the words now. Talking about it in general, then Mick will talk about the way you can request for an advance payment. I will take it over then to look at how things work when the subsidy is finally determined. Mick will discuss some loose ends, some other conditions. Then if we have some time left, we will look at the other support measures by the Dutch government. They might not be 100% applicable to your organization, but still it would be good for you to know about these measures. Okay, well, I assume that you are all fine. Have a cup of coffee or tea, so we'll move on with the now in general. So first of all, what's the purpose of now? Aim is to support employers in times of immediate and severe decline in turnover by means of a contribution to wage costs to prevent unemployment from happening, and this by means of a subsidy. It's part of a package of measures to keep the economy going as much as possible. While COVID-19 is impacting on the labor market, the government does not consider it to be a normal entrepreneurial risk, hence the subsidy. Our government assumes that 25% of the companies looking at the total wage bill will apply for the support, and that the average turnover decrease will be 45%. It's expected that at least 10 billion euros is involved for the first 3 months this measure will be applied. So at what date and time can employers apply for the grant under the NOW? The UWV, the governmental organization that also takes care of unemployment benefits, plans to open the counter on April 6th, and that's their intention. And today we will know if this will actually be the case. The counter will not open later than the 13th of April. The application procedure will be digital. For those of you who are familiar with the application process for dismissal permits, I think it will be a similar process. How long does the now remain in effect? Initially, it pertains to subsidies for labor costs from the period March up until May. A decision will be taken on 1st of June 2020 whether or not now will be extended. It has already been communicated in the arrangement that further conditions can be added to the regulation, so restrictions with respect to access or the amount of the benefit, because of course it's a costly benefit. Government told us, well, whatever it takes, we will do it, but at some point there is a tipping point, I suppose. So we will see, depending on how many companies will apply for the support, if it will be continued in the way it is set up right now. So when can employers expect an advance payment of the subsidy? Advance payments will be done within a period of 2 to 4 weeks after the application. Then it will be done in 3 installments. So the first installments will be paid within 2 to 4 weeks. That's what the UWV intends to do. And then this decision period on the application is 13 weeks. What compensation do you talk about? The idea is that in case of a turnover decrease of a full 100%, 90% of the wage bill will be compensated for. And that if you have a slightly less decline in turnover, a proportional compensation would apply. But you should at least have a decline in turnover of at least 20%. This is perhaps a good moment to launch a poll. Do you expect a loss of turnover of 20% or more? You see in your screen, should screen a poll in progress. We will see if what that result will be. Majority expects a decline of 20% or more. Just 10% not, and the others do. Okay, well, then I think this is a useful webinar for you. I'll share the results with you. Okay, so the compensation is significant if you don't have any turnover anymore. If all of a sudden it is proportional if the turnover is less. So if it's for instance 90%, and you get 90% of your wage bill. Well, no, 90% of 90% you will get compensated. We'll get to some examples of the compensation later in the webinar. There is a maximum, so you might think, well, are the salary payments of our management compensated as well? If you have a CEO with an income of 15,000 gross, you might think, well, is that significant income also compensated? There is a cap, so not all salaries are compensated. The max is twice the maximum daily wage. So we have a maximum daily wage in the Netherlands. Twice that amount will be compensated, which is 9,538 euros. 9,538. So all salaries above this amount will not be compensated. So if you have a CEO with a 15,000 euro income, his salary will be compensated until this amount of 9,538. There is things like pension contributions, holiday allowance, etc., will not be compensated, but there is a general surcharge for employers' contributions of 30%. So on the one hand, there is this cap on with respect to the higher salaries. On the other hand, there is a surcharge of 30% that you can apply to your total wage bill. Which means that the government thought about, well, lots of companies have different costs, holiday allowance, different pension costs. We will just offer them a general surcharge of 30% covering for these costs. So how to deal with the convergence of the working hours reduction? Maybe a short introduction. Until recently, it was possible to apply for part-time, working times reduction, so that you could apply for less working hours for your employees, and you would get compensated by means of unemployment benefits. That was really short the arrangement. If you have requested for short working times for your employees, then the requests that all requests for reduction in working hours that have not been made or not been dealt with by the government before March 17, 6:45 p.m., they will be considered as applications for the now arrangement. So say you've applied for the working times arrangement, you have not had a decision yet, then that application will be considered as an application to now. And in that case, you will be sent a letter by the UWV with a request to provide additional information to how to apply to the now. If you've been granted already this working time reduction, then you will continue to receive it for the first period, and after the first period, you can apply for the now arrangement. And in that case, if you've received unemployment benefits for your employees, they will be deducted from the wage bill for March, May. This is quite technical. If someone in this webinar has applied to the working time reduction and has some specific questions, please do let us know. So that is the NOW in general. I will now move over to for Mick to discuss with you how to apply for the advance payments. Before I do that, maybe last thing, is the now open to all employers? Answer is yes. All employers with wages in the Netherlands employing employees who are compulsory insured for employee insurance. That also include persons with a so-called fictional employment, but majority shareholders are not included. What is included is some foreign companies with wages in the Netherlands, but we will get to that issue later on in the webinar, as I expect that, especially in this group, there will be questions on how to deal with group issues, companies in a group. Okay, now moving on to the way to request an advance payment.
Good morning, everyone. Very welcome that you all here this morning. I will guide you through the process of the application for the now to request an advance payment. For the request for the advance payment, there are two concepts very important. That's the turnover and the total wage bill, how the wage costs of the company are calculated. We will get to that in this chapter, but first let me tell you how much the advance payment is. That's 80% of the requested subsidy. So 80% of the requested subsidy is the advance payment, which will be paid, as Martyn told you, within 2 to 4 weeks after applying for the subsidy. So now let's have a look on turnover. Very important question, of course, is should my loss of turnover be the result of the Corona crisis? I don't see the chat function. I will move over.
Let's see. Oh, okay, hold on. There you are again.
Yeah. All right. Eat. Ethan Holmes asked what fictional employment is. There are a couple of, in the law it's mentioned that a couple of specific workers are seen as employees, which might not be employees if that wasn't in the decided by law, but that's not very relevant because it's very specific cases which will be not be most likely applicable for the companies who are represented in this webinar. Middle, we have expats that under the Social Security of Japan by means of a treaty with Japan. As such, they are not included under Dutch Social Security. I would assume we cannot request a subsidy based on the salary of those expats. Is that correct? All employees who are, we fall under the scope of the Dutch Social Security premiums are included in the wage bill, but I will get to that when I get to the part of the wage bill. Let's focus first on the turnover, and I will answer all questions relating to the turnover now, and all questions relating to the wage bill when we get to the wage bill, because then it's much more effective if we deal with both chapters separately. So let's get to the turnover first. Should the turnover be dependent, should the loss of turnover be dependent on Corona? No, although the NOW has been decided to compensate for the loss of turnover due to these exceptional circumstances, it's not expressly a condition that it can be substantiated by the company that the loss of turnover is the result of the Corona crisis. So, although it's been the reason for the now is the Corona crisis, there's not an obligation for the company that you can substantiate that the loss of turnover is the result of the Corona crisis. Betty also asked a question about the employees and the 30% ruling. We will get to that in the turnover, in the wage bill part. We'll focus now on the turnover first. What is the reference turnover? The reference, one of the most important questions is how to calculate the reference turnover. The answer of the administration is that they have opted for the practically best feasible calculation by choosing a quarter of the turnover for 2019. So, and if a company started to make revenues in the course of 2019, so for instance, a startup or a new company, then the turnover is calculated for 2019 pro rata up to February 2020. So the reference turnover is a quarter of the turnover of 2019. And so there's no seasonal influencers or something like that. It's just the reference turnover is a quarter of the reference, the turnover in 2019. So Rolf asked, is the government only comparing the average turnover of 2019? It's just the total 2019 turnover and therefore of a quarter of the turnover of 2019. So no seasonal influences. What if you are a startup whose sales have tripled since 2019? It's not relevant. If you are a startup who started before 2019. So it started to make revenues as even before the 1st of January 2019. Then the turnover of 2019 is still relevant, and there's no specific calculation for startups or other companies. So what is then the net turnover? That's the exact definition of turnover, is in line with the turnover definition in the annual accounts law, in the jaarrekeningenrecht. With this turnover concept, the administration tries to be as close as possible to the turnover generated from the core activities of the company. Net turnover is the revenue from the supply of goods and services from the business of the entity, minus the discounts and minus discounts of the customers. Revenues are the income from the performance of the normal activities of the company. This means that the turnover is recognized if the activities relate to the supply of goods or services for a specific customer with whom a sales or contract has been concluded. So that's the way the net turnover is calculated. And that's, of course, very important to decide this with your accountant, because that's the person who's most likely able to show or determine what the net turnover has been for 2019. And that's one of the reasons why the administration has chosen for this concept, because it has been, the thought behind it, the reason behind it, is that all companies, being large, medium, small, or micro, are able to provide their net turnover quite easily, perhaps with the help of the accountant. Is government funding also included in the turnover, is asked. I will get to that, but yes, it is pro rata included in the turnover, but I will get to that a little bit later on in this chapter about the turnover. So that's the way to calculate the turnover for 2019. And then, of course, it's important to decide what is the drop in turnover in 2020. So we will go to that now. The decrease in turnover, the drop in turnover, must be reported in a connected period of 3 months, starting on March 1st, March 1st, April 1st, or May 1st. And then the end date is the 30th of the 31st, 3 months later. So you have a choice if you calculate the loss of turnover and it starts the 1st of March, 1st of April, 1st of May. That's about the only real choice a company can make in the now. And the reason is that not all companies who have a decline of work due to this corona crisis notice it directly in their revenues. So it's possible that you choose as a company to have to start with the calculation period later than the 1st of March. So there are 3 possibilities: 1st of March, 1st of April, 1st of May. And directly at the moment of your application, you have to choose which period you're going to take for the drop of turnover, of the expected drop of turnover, because you don't know, of course, yet. It's the expected drop of turnover. And so seasonal influences are not relevant. So yeah, it's a bit relevant in the sense that you can choose the period, but if you make most of the revenues in a certain period of the year, it's not relevant. You cannot choose to pick a later period for those 3 consecutive months. And the wage bill, the wage bill, for which concept we will look after this, the chapter of the turnover, will always be the period March till May, but we will get to that at the next chapter. So far, no questions about this, so I will continue with the group. We are part of the group help. So this will probably be relevant for a lot of companies involved today. Oh, one question from Melanie. What happens if the Dutch company does not have an own entity and falls under the German GmbH, but still has its own Chamber of Commerce number and payroll happens in the Netherlands? Most important question will be, is there any revenues in the Netherlands? Are there employees in the Netherlands? And if there's revenue and employees in the Netherlands and there's an own tax account, tax number, then it will be possible to ask for the subsidy in the Netherlands. But there must be revenues in the Netherlands and there must be Dutch employees in the sense of employees who are paid under Dutch social security premiums. And that's, if that's the situation, then also a German GmbH or a Dutch company can also apply for the loss of compensation, as long as there's employees and there's Dutch social security premiums involved and there's revenue in the Netherlands. This might be too specific to answer with everyone. We are a membership association and or member fees are due in June. Many of our members are affected, but we do not know until June whether they will be able to pay their fees or not. If we will only know if we lose turnover in June and then have subsequent negative effects on staffing after this. Do we have to wait and see if the now is extended? Now you may choose now that you predict that your loss of revenue is in the period May, June, and July, because the latest date you can start the 3 consecutive months in which you expect your loss of revenue is in the month May. So you can apply for the now. Sorry for that. It's a bit difficult in English, but you get directly, so starting next week, and then apply for revenue losses in May, June, and July. But that's an expectation, and that's okay. So it's an expectation that you have a loss of revenue for those 3 months. So that's not too specific. It can apply for all companies. If you expect that your revenue loss is biggest in May, June, July, you can apply for those 3 months. All right. Melanie, subsequent question of Melanie. Thanks. Is the turnover then calculated only for Dutch income? If the German GmbH has a couple of Dutch employees who fall under the Dutch social security premiums, then the loss, the wage bill. No, not in German, of course. It must be related to the Netherlands, the turnover. Adelie asked, I'm wondering if there's also a subsidy for startups that are not having any revenue yet, still building the product. Yeah, that's very tough times for those startups. They are fully dependent on their suppliers, the funders, because if there's no revenue yet, there's no revenue to give at the application. So there's nothing in this now for the startups which do not make any revenue yet. Annelies says, reason why I'm asking is because our employees can't work their full hours because of the homeschooling of their kids. Yeah, sorry, Adelie, that's also for of the question of the startups. Yeah, there's no specific arrangement for startups. So if there's no revenue, and it's all based on the revenue So if there's no revenue yet at all, then there's no compensation based on the NOA, based on the no. All right, we proceed to the group. The basis of the drop in turnover is that at the highest level within the group is considered. The idea behind this is that at that level, the highest level, the turnover of wage costs eventually coincide, and that this is so the turnover and the wage costs eventually coincide, and this is therefore practically feasible and least susceptible to fraud. Every employer, it's important, every employer within the group must submit its own application, and all employers within the group must report the same expected percentage of loss of turnover. So every employer in the group must complete his own application, but all employers within the group must give the same percentage of loss of expected loss of turnover. So every employer with a separate payroll tax number must apply for its own application. For groups with Dutch and foreign subsidiaries, they do not have to count, they are not allowed to count the drop in turnover of the legal entities in the group that do not have a Dutch social security premium salary, the SV salary. The idea behind this is that the relationship of companies established abroad without the Dutch SV salary with the Netherlands is so small that it's not reasonable to take into account the drop in turnover that will take place at those companies within the group. And the group is decided on the 1st of March of 2020. So the scope of the group is decided on the 1st of March of 2020. And it's important that the loss of turnover for foreign companies with employees in the Netherlands can also be taken into account. Rolf asks, is there any possibility you can compare revenue lost based on the contract we currently have with our clients? Is there any possibility you can compare revenue lost based on the contract we currently have with our clients? Is that a subsequent question? Okay. Could you specify your question a bit more, Rolf? Then I will be able to answer your question properly. Is there any possibility you can compare revenue lost based on the contract we currently have with our clients? If you can specify it a little bit more, Rolf, I will go into I will answer your question a little bit later. Thanks. Are there any special rules regarding subsidies or other grants or benefits? Yes. The other grants and subsidies must be taken into account pro rata. So for subsidies and grants in 2019, you have to take pro rata the subsidies and grants for the reference period. And the same goes for 2020. So if a grant or a subsidy is granted for a full year, you have to take into account a quarter of it for the 3 months period. So you can't decide that the subsidy or grant was granted in January and therefore it falls outside the scope of the reference period. So you must take into account for pro rata for those grants and subsidies. Probably Rolf is going to extend this question a little bit, but I will go into the wage bill and I will get to the question of Rolf shortly, a moment later. The wage bill. What is meant by wage bill or total wage costs? Well, Martyn has clarified this a little bit more already. It's the wage bill consists of the wages on which the employee insurance contributions are paid, so the SV wages. The UWV uses the wage bill of January 2020. So that's important. It's the wage bill of January 2020. That's the reference wage bill. Corrections after 15 March on the wages of that month of January 2020 are not longer included, so it's not able to tweak the wage bill of January anymore. The wages of all employees who were employed by the applicant by the company in January 2020 are included in this. So it's also in all wage costs for flexible contracts, but now if they are under the SV wages of the company. So no payroll employees, for instance. A maximum of a little bit over 9,500 euros is the maximum of the wage per employee, which will be taken into account. And on top of that, a 30% addition for all employers' cost is included. Martyn already told you guys that. So it doesn't include employees hired after January. For the application, it's the January wage bill is included. So it doesn't the application for now. It's only the January wage bill, and then to decide the definite subsidiary, that wage bill of January is compared with the average wage bill of March, April, and May. So if it's the average base of a wage bill of March, April, and May is lower than the wage bill in January, that might influence your the final subsidy which will be granted. I understood that the UWV will determine themselves the refund, but for some employees receive a 13-month and holiday allowance per month. Locals received in May and December. Yes, if you pay the holiday allowance, for instance, per month, there's a correction on the way to calculate the wage bill of January, and your accountant is fully aware of how that the wage bill should be included in the UWV application. And we have understood ourselves yesterday too that the UWV will be able to provide you with their information about your wage bill of January, which is necessary for the application. But you should always check that amount, of course, with your own accountant if it's the correct amount, which might be included by the UWV in the application. So total, Betty asks, so total SV wages in January might include other components than only gross salary. If, for instance, the employer pays the 8% holiday allowance in January, so or on a monthly basis, then there will be a slightly different calculation, and the accountant will be able to help you guys with this. Melanie asked, the measure is to ensure nothing changes in the salary of employee. Even if they would need to work less, as there is less work, they will still get 100% paid. Yes, the idea, the whole idea behind the now is that you pay the employees 100% of their salary, and also that you pay employees with a flexible contract the same amount for the next 3 months, or March, April, and May, as you did in January. And if your total wage bill of January is the same as the average of March, April, May, then the advance payment will be totally in line with the final subsidiary. But if your total wage costs drop in March, April, and May, that might have a negative impact on the outcome of the final subsidy you will receive. So the measure is to ensure that employees will receive their 100% salary, and it's to stimulate that flexible contracts will receive the same amount of salary in March, April, and May as they have received in January 2020. Where were we? Only the current employment wages will be taken into account. So, for instance, if a severance payment has been paid in January, then that's not included in the wage bill. So that will be because that's wages that come from former employment, as it's stipulated in fiscal law, tax law. And the payroll of the entire group is important. So if you're part of the group, the entire group wage bill should be included, and the same goes for the loss in revenue for the full group. I have to join an urgent call. Can I ask a question after this webinar? Yes, Rolf, you can contact us directly. I will give the email once more. So ask your question, send your question to this email address, and we'll also record this webinar. We will send it to you. So if you want to have a look at this webinar in your own time, you can see it for yourself. All right, Rolf, thank you for joining us, and have a good day. And Natalie asked, or they simply look at the total wage cost. Natalie, they look at the wage cost of January 2020. So, and there might be some deductions if there's for instance, the monthly holiday allowance or a severance payment, but that's also it's almost all taken into account, and your accountant will be able to help you to determine the exact number of your wage bill of January 2020. Yes, but if you hire more staff in April, if your average total wage bill in March, April, and May, it's not taken into account. So then if it's a lower amount, then it's taken into account, but there's no upside for you if you have a higher average wage bill over those 3 months. So if you have hired more staff in April, which leads to a higher total wage cost in March, April, and May, then it's not an upside for you. There's no upside for you. Which group of workers are covered by the wage bill? Martyn already went into this question. All employees fall under the scope of this wage bill. So important, no self-employed, so no ZZP'ers, no self-employed workers are included. All flexible contracts are included, and also the director majority shareholder is not included in the wage bill. So that's important. And last question I had on this for this chapter is, are the wage costs of employees with a flexible employment contract are also compensated? Yes, they are. So they are all compensated. And the salary of temporary agency workers is falls not under the scope of the SV salary of your companies. So that's not included. And the same goes for the payroll employees. It's not part of the SV wages of your companies, so they fall back to the temporary agency or the payroll company. Sonia asked, hi, can you end definite contracts that end, for example, in May? Yes, you are fully entitled to end temporary contracts. It might have an influence, of course, on your average wage bill, but you are fully entitled to end contracts. Supervisory board members paid in Netherlands but living abroad, supervisory board members in Holland. It's all depending if they are paid with a SV salary. So if there are social premiums paid for those supervisory board members, most of the time it's not. But check that with your accountant. He knows within a heartbeat if the payment to those supervisory board members in Netherlands falls within the scope of the SV wage bill of the concern or the company. That's for me the last question I prepared, and also the last question in the chat. So I will move over for Martyn to join you guys for the next chapter.
Okay. Let's see where we are. One. So, okay. Final determination. So Mick talked with you about the advance payment. Of course, in the end, there will be a final determination on of the subsidy, and the final data of the turnover decline is the basis for this calculation. This data results in a certain percentage of decline related to the data for 2019, 25% of the turnover for 2019. And then the wage bill for March up until May is taken, the SV loan. Mick talked about that. This is multiplied by 1.3 and multiplied subsequently by the factor that is associated with the reduction in turnover. So this is really a mathematical exercise that, of course, is something that your accountant will be heavily involved in. At least that is our advice to do so. This, and I think this was also something that was mentioned already during the webinar, it can result in a compensation that's lower than the advance payment. For instance, in the case of the turnover decline was less than expected, or in case the wage bill was lower than the one in January. There then a maximum subsidy for an employer? No, there's no max other than the maximum level of reimbursed wages, the 9,500 euros gross that we've talked about before. These are some examples that you could look into, or how this may play out in case of a, well, you see the figures, the turnover, the wage bill, then how this plays out if you have a 5% decline in turnover, which of course doesn't meet the threshold of 20%, so no subsidy. And what happens is if you have a 60% or a 90% decline, and you see that this will how this will relate to the advance payment. The advance payment is 80%, and then you get the final payments. That will be recalculated. I think for now it is important to know how this system works and to determine for you that you should be able to determine when do you expect a heavy decline in turnover. I think that is the most important. Subsequently, apply to the correct or to the most make a good estimation on the decline in turnover and take that as your basis for the application. Let's see, I'm going back. I see all the questions that should pop up one by one, but okay. How does it work if an employer has multiple payroll tax numbers? So you do know if you have one company, then you have you're likely to have one LB LB number, LB, and that's 2 letters, and then you have a number behind it. That's the loonheffingen number, and I've translated that as the payroll tax number. But if you have multiple payroll tax numbers, you should know that you should submit an application for each payroll tax number, stating the drop in turnover expected for the entire company. So if you're in a group of companies, as Mick told you, you should look at the decline in turnover for the whole group. If the decline is 20% or more, then you can apply. So then you should apply for each company with its own payroll tax number, right? So all the companies with each of their own payroll tax number should take the same decline in turnover percentage, because that's based on the decline at the group level. And subsequently, they will get compensated based on the wage bill for each of those companies. So you don't look at the individual company. So it could be that one of the companies has a decline of less than 20%. It will still get the compensation because you look at the group level. What is then the impact of a reorganization? So the idea would be, the idea of the government is that employment is retained as much as possible. Last week, when the arrangement was not fleshed out yet, it was communicated that employers should not fire people based on economical reasons during the period that they have been granted this the now arrangement, the now subsidy. So that's, in our assessment, meant that basically that was a condition for application to the now, right? So if you fire people based on economic reasons and you can't apply to now, that is much more nuanced, apparently, because in the fleshed out arrangement, it says that there will be an adjustment made in the final calculation for the business dismissals that you have submitted with the UWV. So you're probably aware that if you want to fire someone for economical reasons, often you will get to a settlement agreement, but if you don't, at the end you'd have to file an application with the UWV. Those applications are taken into account with the final determination of the subsidy, and what then will happen is that a deduction of the subsidy will take place based on the wages of the individual that you have fired. So if you have an employee with a salary of 5,000 gross, you have executed a dismissal. The subsidy will be reduced by with the wages for this individual with an added 50% of this bill of the wages. So in this specific example, the subsidy will be reduced with not 5K but with 7.5K. So there's basically a penalty if you have fired people for business reasons. Please note that settlement agreements are not taken into account. You can still settle with people on the basis of economical reasons and also on the basis of personal reasons. So and also if you don't get to a settlement with an individual based on, for instance, a breach of trust, you can still apply or submit a request for termination in court. Although I must say that the courts presently are only open for urgent cases. So it's not said that this will be that there will be a quick process. I would expect that that at least it will take one additional month, because usually you would have a oral hearing, and the question is, of course, that's not possible presently. Plus a request for termination generally is not regarded as something urgent. So know about that. Settling is still possible. Submitting a UWV application for termination based on economic reasons will have financial impact on the subsidy. So what's about a refund, or can you receive extra in the final determination? There are roughly four end results possible. The first is that your turnover decline is more than you expected when you applied for the advance payment. Then you would get, in principle, you get a additional payment, an additional subsidy in the final determination. If your decline in turnover was less than expected, then it will be, you have to pay that something back. If your wage bill is lower than in January, then yeah, you also would have to pay something back, because then the basis for the subsidy is lower. And then, as Mick already told you, if your wage bill is higher than in January, there's no upside for you, so you don't get anything more than based on January. When will this final subsidy be determined? So a decision on the application will be made within 13 weeks after the receipt of the application, which is done digitally. And we expect that it will be, well, this is something administrative, but we will expect that something will be put in place to ensure that that a proper authorization process will be followed, similar to when you would submit a petition for dismissal with the UWV. So the period is 13 weeks. The decision would also state the period where you would have to apply for the subsidy. So there's a couple of things, right? You'd have to apply, your initial application will be for the advance payment. Then you get a decision on the application, and then that will also mention when you'd have to submit the documents on the final decline in turnover. And you'd have to do that within 22 weeks after the end of the period where you would have measured your decline, right? And there's three options. You can start a 3-month period in March, you can start it in April, and you can start it in May. So you can, if you would start it in March, the end of the measure period would be the end of May, and 22 weeks after the end of May. By then you should have submitted the documents on the turnover decline and any other documents that are requested by the UWV. So which anti-abuse provisions are included in the NOW, the NOW? So this is a really rough, quick and fast arrangement set up in like a couple of weeks by the government. Usually you would expect things like this to take months, if not years, and a really thorough process will be followed by our legislator. Of course, this is a temporary emergency measure. The Dutch government has included some anti-abuse provisions because it's people can apply, for instance, if they very wealthy companies with a decline in turnover of 20% or more can still apply, even though they would not really suffer, right? If you have low costs in your company and your turnover is very high, and you would expect something less, more than 20%, that might not be a huge problem for you as a company, but still you could apply. So that's something that is possible. Our Prime Minister made a moral appeal to companies that don't really need it, that shouldn't apply. If you do apply, that would not be regarded as abuse. But if you, for instance, fake employment, that would be regarded as abuse. And in that case, the UWV can start a criminal investigation with the help of the public prosecutor. In less fraudulent cases, then if there's, for instance, a suspicion that the conditions for the application are not met, then the UWV may suspend the payment of the subsidy or reclaim the amount paid. There are administrative demands. So as a company, you should keep your file for at least 5 years to be looked at by the UWV. So you should open up your records to the UWV up until 5 years after the subsidy has been granted. You see a question: are companies that's closed down as a precautionary measure eligible? Yes, that is correct, Kenny. For instance, restaurants that have been closed down due to the situation in a very early stage of the COVID-19 situation, they have a decline in turnover, and they can apply to this subsidy. Do you need a auditor's report? Yes, you do. In principle, you do. The measure says, well, of course, to objectify things, you need to have a accountant's rapportage, so your accountant should make an official statement on the wage bill and decline in turnover. It's likely that the measure will be amended within 4 weeks from now, because possibly smaller companies or companies that make smaller claims to the now, they should not be having to involve an accountant in this respect. So I think there will be some kind of a tipping point where you do, or where you should or should not involve an accountant. I think for most companies, it's at least advisable at this stage to involve the accountant, because it's a very financially driven exercise. You need to make calculations on the wage bill. You need to have a thorough and substantiated assessment of your decline in turnover. So you do need an accountant to help you with this. What we can do for you is to help you, to aid you in the application process, of course. But I think this is something you'd have to involve both your accountant and your lawyer. I think at this stage, it would be good to have a second poll, and that would be: do you intend to apply to this now arrangement? Let's see what that gives us. So, well, there's 67% said yes, 11% says no, and 22% says maybe. I'll share the results with you. Okay. This is on the final determination. There are some topics left for us to discuss. I will make room for Mick to discuss those with you.
So, a couple of remaining topics. These are just questions which popped up by ourselves, or which has been asked by our clients these last days. So we gathered them a little bit together. But please feel free to ask any additional questions in the chat about the topics we've discussed so far. Is now at the expense of unemployment benefits for employees? No, it's not. That's really different than with the former WTV. As Martyn explained, this is not at the expense of employment benefits for employees. So it's favorable for the employees comparing to the former regulation we had. The extension of the measure under the same conditions. Martyn already mentioned this at the start. There might be an extension. It's decided well before the 1st of June if it's going to be extended and under which conditions. The administration has said that it might be under different conditions. So you can't expect it to be extended and not under the same conditions. That's not guaranteed. It's open. There are no restrictions on rules in how much time the employees have to work during this time. No, it's allowed to have them worked full time. That's also very different from the WTV regulation we had before. So you can ask the employees to work full-time and also maybe in slightly different way as they were supposed to be, or slightly different tasks, as long as it's comparable with their regular work. Can you object a decision if it's declined, or perhaps because of the amount of the subsidy? Yes, that's possible. You can object first at the UWV, and afterwards you can go to court and even appeal in court. So that's open for this regulation. Which administrative obligations apply? You have to keep your accounts for 5 years after the application has been granted. So 5 years after the application has been granted, so that's an important date. You have to keep all accounts and have to show it to the UWV or the tax authorities at first notice. Information obligation towards employees about the application. Yes, if there's a works council or another representative body of employees within the company, that's your which you have to talk with. If you do not have a works council or another representative body of employees, then you have to inform the employees. You don't have to inform them what your expected loss and turnover is, for instance, but you have to inform the employees that you applied for this subsidy. Is the mandatory use of the compensation? Yes, the compensation must be used to pay wages. If it's used for another purpose, that's really, really tricky, because then the UWV may decide to fully withdraw the compensation. So you have to pay have to return everything. So it's mandatory use for the compensation to pay for the wages of the employees. What does it cost Treasury? Martyn already told you that 10 billion is the expected costs at this moment, but that's just a broad guess. It's based on the first week of applications of the WTV regulation, which is not applicable anymore. So it's 10 billions for now, but that's an expectation. The administration has said multiple times already, whatever it takes. So whatever it takes, they are not going to let companies down. That's the message they've been sending so far. So these were the other conditions or the loose ends for a couple of remaining questions about the now regulation. I see there's one more question in the chat. There are no restrictions or rules in how much. Oh, do we have to apply for sick leave compensation for the employees normally during this time? Do we apply for sick leave compensation for employees normally during this time? Sick leave compensation is just to pay the employee their wages they are entitled for during sickness, and that's fully compensated. So if you pay the sick employee 100%, it's fully compensated, but also if you pay 70%, just based on the arrangement, on the agreement made with the employee, the full payment of salary for sick employees is compensated under the now regulation. I don't see any more questions in the chat. For me, I don't have other loose ends or other questions which we prepared for the now regulation. Martyn will tell you a little bit more about the two other regulations which are in place, which are maybe not directly applicable for the companies involved in this webinar, but it's relevant to know what our administration has been put up as a full scheme to help the employers in the Netherlands. So thank you for joining us. I will move over for Martyn for the final part of this webinar, and hope to see you next time. Bye-bye.
All right. Okay. Other conditions we talked about. So shortly, some other support measures with very weird abbreviations. But so the TBIE and the AEAS. Let's just look at them, what they mean. The temporary bridging scheme for independent entrepreneurs. It consists of an assistance, so basically something to cover the minimal cost you have as an individual to live, and some assistance to meet working capital requirements. It's for all entrepreneurs, so self-employed, without staff, independent entrepreneurs with staff, and also for director majority shareholders in a BV. You should meet the hour criterion, so you should have worked for at least 1,225 hours in a full year. It also includes, not only includes working for clients, but also admin and marketing activities. You should have registered before the March 17, 2020, and resident and based in the Netherlands. There are some specifics and questions on how foreigners can apply. Looking at Eton, that's still a pending question. I will address that outside this webinar. Income tests. There are important differences with the BBZ, that is the bijstand, so the welfare. With the welfare, you, if you have, as an entrepreneur, don't have any income, you can go to the municipality and say, well, please, I would apply for welfare. And then the test would be, well, you should, if you have your own house or a mortgage, then you should sell your house. If you have savings, you should use the savings. And only after that you can apply to welfare. But those rules don't apply in this arrangement. So that's the upside. The idea is that there's no requirement of viability of the company, no so-called power test, no test on the partner's income. So you don't look at basically the income or the house, the savings of an individual. If you have a decline in turnover, then you get a subsidy. So what does it look like? It's the social minimum. It's 1,050 euros for a single person and 1,500 for someone who's married. So these are basically to cover the basic cost, right? And if someone is, if an independent entrepreneur doesn't have a decline in turnover that's that much, that much, then they won't get this benefit. So only if you're basically down to 1,050 or less, then you will get an addition covering for the social minimum. This would apply for the same period as the now, so it applies to March 1st to May 31st, 2020, maximum of 3 months of compensation. And after the 3 months, you will get a similar review of the actual turnover in the company. The other measure is the loan. Basically, this would be something that also, if you don't fulfill the criteria to get the 1,050 compensation as an entrepreneur, you can still apply to a loan. And this is an idea. It's roughly 10K, 10,157, with a relatively low interest rate, and no repayment has to take place until the 1st of January 2021. So this is something that if you would go to a bank at this stage, you probably get a less favorable loan. But it's of course not in any way comparable with the situation with the now arrangement, where employers would basically cover for a substantial part of the wage cost. Then there is an allowance for entrepreneurs affected sectors. Certain entrepreneurs in sectors would get an allowance of 4,000 euros. It depends on whether or not your company falls under a certain SBI code. The link I've provided you, and you look at the SBI, you can take a look at the codes that that are included, and you would compare them with the SBI codes that should be on your extraction from the Chamber of Commerce, right? So it's those sectors are determined by the codes. It's a 4K compensation for especially smaller entrepreneurs. This is, of course, a relatively big compensation. So that's it. That's the wrap. If you have any questions, do feel free to drop us an email or give us a call. We hope you have enjoyed it. We hope you found this informative. I would kindly ask you to fill in the survey that will pop up after I've ended this meeting. You look at the video, of course, and that's it. We hope to see you soon in another webinar, because this will certainly not be the last one. Goodbye.